this is something that's been building. And if you've been following me for long, I've been talking about it for a bit. It just only pops up in certain circles or in certain conversations. But we'd like to think that AI is, it's here to make the world a better place. By default, it will always be used for good. Where it's not used for good, it's an exception to the rules. It's a bad actor. It's things like that. And we'd like to think that we're all going to see the benefits of where all these trillions of dollars are going. And we don't really ask questions like, where is all that money going and what are we doing with it? Well, there was a little bit of a reveal to where some of this stuff is going this last week, over the past week, when Google made a shift. So I'll set the table for this. If you followed Google for very long, you've known they've had controversies as they've scaled up. One of them was when they first started, they had a commitment, and it was, in some ways, it was childlike, but I really actually appreciate it. They had a commitment that one of their moral governance standards was don't be evil. Now, we could sit and argue, is that really measurable? How do we measure that? What does that even mean? Evil in the eyes of who? And yes, those are all good things that we should ask. And if you're going to have an ethical statement that says we don't do evil, you sure better well define that, or you're going to get blown up all over the place because you might think you're not doing evil. Someone somewhere on the internet thinks you're doing evil, even if you're not, or even if you're convinced you're not, at least. So I get we could debate that, but they took a ton of heat back in, I don't remember when it was. I think it was 2018. They eliminated Don't Be Evil. And they had already changed it. I'm not going to get into the full history lesson of it here, but it had already been through some transformations. And a lot of the excuses, reasons, whatever behind it was, as you get to be a bigger company, as you're more diversified, as you're more involved in different things, it becomes harder and harder to not do evil, especially in a very vague general sense. If you're only doing one thing, it's probably a little easier to go. If you're only doing one thing with 5 people and you only have 100 customers, it's a little easier to go, yeah, we're not doing evil. As it gets bigger, the lack of definition, the lack of, well, what's evil? Evil according to who? Evil against who? Becomes more complicated. And so even when I remember, gosh, people were freaking out when they got rid of Don't Be Evil in like 2018. It was like, oh, this is the end. They are the evil empire out to destroy us all. And I didn't feel that way because I was like, well, in some regards, I understand where they're coming from. I don't like what they're doing, but it was not as nefarious as everybody made it out to be. Now, the more recent one has me more concerned because some of the other chess pieces that are moving on the board. So if you haven't been following Google or Alphabet the last week, one of the things they did was they had a long-standing commitment. It's been, I don't know how long it's been with them. Let's just say it's been with them a very long time. And that commitment was, we will not create AI for the purpose of causing harm. Okay. Which we could have the same argument as the previous one. Well, what's harm? Harming who? How do we define harm? What if the great, I get that. Hey, my point isn't that. But they removed it very quietly and they just kind of pulled it off, hoping nobody would notice, which in the age of the internet, you can't really get away with anything. But it drew a ton of attention to this, and it drew a ton of attention to something that I think we need to be paying more attention to, which is these big AI companies, going back to my previous point of all these questions around where is all this money going? And what is all this innovation for? To who, for who, and what is the end game with a lot of this stuff? Now, this is not Christopher Lind, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia conspiracy theory type thing. But if you start paying attention to what these big AI companies are doing, the connections they have to big government, the connections they now are establishing with defense companies and all this other stuff, there is a major, major shift that a large portion of the innovation and effort around AI is to be used for militaristic purposes, which, I mean, it would be very understandable why you would want to remove your governing standard of not making AI to cause harm if you fully are aware that a large part of your strategy is to create AI for the purpose of causing harm on other people. Now, this especially is when you put the pieces together, makes sense. Not that I agree with it, but makes sense coming on the heels of Google not necessarily performing real well. They had their earnings call and they did not do as well as they'd like. And usually, when people aren't doing as well financially as they like, they start to make compromises. They start getting involved in things they swore that they would never do because, well, I mean, we got to make that money somehow. So, why not tap into the US military complex that spends more money than Lord knows what on anything else? And so, this is very much a subtle thing that we as citizens need to be paying attention to. Now, I'm not ringing the alarm bell saying, "Oh my gosh, look out, everybody! There's going to be armed robots, marching through the streets, shooting people." It's not going to be what's the Netflix series anyway. It's not that. This is not. I'm not talking dystopian type stuff, but I'm talking about the fact that we've largely just come to accept whatever happens as it's probably fine. It's probably good. And we get sucked up in distractions like how old the team members of Doge are while completely ignoring, wait, where are these hundreds of billions of dollars on AI going? What are we doing with that? What are we targeting? Where's this? What's this going to be used for? For what purposes? And we're easily distracted and we miss some of this stuff. And as a result, we don't notice when all of a sudden all this money and all this effort that we think is going to make our lives better is actually going to destroy and eliminate lives. Now, for anybody listening who is involved in the military, please do not take this as an anti-military position. I'm not saying I'm against the military. I'm not saying, we shouldn't have a military. I'm not saying let's all just hug and sit around a campfire. I understand we live in a broken world and the military is tragically just a reality of what we have to do. At the same time, as the public who is responsible, one, for funding this, because it's our tax dollars going to a lot of this stuff, but then also just ultimately this stuff will catch up with us as a nation at some point. Like we can keep fighting to stay on top, but at some point, staying on top comes at a very, very heavy cost, whether it's the cost to maintain it, which ultimately affects things like eggs being $12 a dozen, milk being $10 a gallon, because gosh, we got to keep funding this AI to keep our military on top. But it also affects global tensions. And you can be a world empire that tries to just take over and try and make everybody like us. And you might get away with it for a while, but at some point, you finally step on too many people's toes and it blows back up in your face. And so I think this is something we need to be watching and keep being mindful of and not buying into some of the hype of either, oh, that's not really ever going to happen. And I'd rather get distracted with some of these other things, or buying into the attitude that it's like, anything the military does is good. Anything the US does is good. It's never wrong. And if we decide we're going to go into said country, take it over and make it better, that's a good thing. We need to go, hang on a second. That's easy to say when you're the one doing it. It's not so easy to say if you're on the receiving end. And how do we think about the folks that are going to negatively be impacted by this? Because we're moving so fast with AI, I can already tell you, we are not taking the time to think through the ethical implications of this. There's not going to be the time spent on how do we make sure that we never use this AI in a way that accidentally kills civilians. Not saying nobody's ever asking that question. I'm just saying with the pace things are moving, that's very much a question that would go, yeah, but ultimately, is it killing more of our enemies? All right, well, then, we got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And that whole pressure to just keep moving, regardless of who gets hurt in the process, it's not okay. And we need to be paying attention to this because I know there are people who, may go, well, there's nothing I can do. Well, maybe not directly, but you can through your votes, you can through writing your Congress people, you can through maybe there's people who listen who are involved in politics and in the office themselves. Like there are things we can do that we can say, hey, this is not okay. If 90% of the dollars going to AI investment is going to create super weapons based on this hypothetical threat of, well, if we don't set whatever country that we know spooks everybody is going to dominate us and take over, folks, come on, calm down. We're going to burn the world thinking that we're saving it if we're not careful. So that just want to make people aware of this one because this one's not getting the headline attention that I think it should. And I think that's on purpose. I think it's on purpose because they would rather have us distracted with stuff that ultimately is irrelevant so that we're not actually paying attention to what's actually happening with a lot of this money and a lot of this technology. All right. So, yeah, go ahead. You can look up some things. And I think you'll quickly see that there's a reason Google removed Don't Make Harmful AI. And they're not the only ones who are making this shift to repurpose their technology for reasons other than giving you friendly chatbots that help you accomplish your tasks.